A German Shepherd puppy rescue story that will break your heart and heal it. When I saw the tiny paw prints beside the bears, I thought I was losing my mind. The call came early that morning. Someone had heard crying near the ridge. I went alone, thinking it was another abandoned dog. But those prints in the snow stopped me cold. One set belonged to an American black bear, large and heavy. The other barely the size of my palm. I followed the trail until I saw him, a small German Shepherd puppy trembling, his fur crusted with frost. He wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He was sitting, looking behind him as if waiting for something. I took a step forward, careful, quiet. The puppy turned his head and met my eyes. And in that moment, I swear I saw a soldier's heart inside that tiny body. He whimpered once, weak but stubborn, like he refused to fall apart. And then I heard it, a low breath, deep and rough, from beyond the trees. Every instinct in me said to back away, but I couldn't move. Behind the puppy, a massive black bear stood still, scar slashing across his muzzle. He wasn't hunting. He wasn't growling. He was watching. The puppy looked at me again, then at the bear, as if torn between two worlds. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a chase. This was something else entirely. I whispered, "It's okay, little one. You're safe." He took one uncertain step toward me, then another, and the bear didn't move. I knelt down, reaching out my hand into the cold. The puppy hesitated, then pressed his paw against my glove. At that touch, the bear exhaled, slow, heavy, almost peaceful. When I lifted the puppy into my arms, he didn't fight. He just rested his head against my chest and let out a sound that broke something in me, relief mixed with exhaustion. And from the corner of my eye, I saw the bear turn and walk away, leaving two sets of paw prints side by side in the snow. That's how I met Keen. And that's the moment everything I thought I knew about survival changed. He didn't cry when I lifted him, but his whole body shook like he'd spent all his bravery. Already, I could feel ribs under the fur and the stubborn heartbeat of a brave pup thumping against my jacket. German Shepherd puppy rescue or not, this was triage with two eyes watching from the tree. The bear stayed silent, head tilted as if weighing my promise. Keen nosed my collar and gave a small cracked whine. That sound was soft, breaking, desperate, and it hooked straight into my chest. I slid a finger under his forehead and felt heat and swelling, where a crude wire had bitten the skin. Animal instinct said, "Don't touch." Human instinct said, "Fix it now." I whispered, "Easy, soldier." Because he was trying to steal from me, and that mattered. Puppy trust is a holy thing, and you don't waste it. I took one step back, slow, letting the bear see my hands and the rescued puppy tucked close. He didn't challenge. He just breathed that deep old breath again, like a father who's finally found someone to take the night shift. Puppy and bear and me in the middle. And somehow it wasn't a fight. It was a handoff. I still don't know why he chose me, but sometimes wilderness rescue looks exactly like permission. At the truck, Keen stirred, paw twitching, trying to stand as if to prove he was more dog than damage. Not today, I told him. And for the first time, he let his weight go completely, beyond head, heavy in my elbow. My name is Ethan Hale, 46, and I've seen enough to know when an animal decides you're worth the risk. Behind us, the black bear stepped onto the open path and left one clean print beside my own. Not a warning, a witness. I set Keen on a blanket, reached for the cutters and antiseptic, and heard the wire inside his fur sing like a threat as I touched it. He didn't pull away. He just looked at me and chose to stay while the bear waited in the quiet behind the trees. And I pressed the metal to the first coil and started to cut. The first cut made him flinch, but he didn't cry out. Not once, just looked at me with those glassy eyes that said, "Do what you have to." The wire came away slow, each twist, like peeling paint out of skin. When it finally dropped onto the truck floor, the little German Shepherd puppy exhaled. The smallest sound. Not pain, but relief. That soft sigh you only hear when something decides to live again. I cleaned the wound, my hands shaking harder than his. He just stared, steady, trusting, the way only a rescued puppy does when he's too tired to lie. "You're tougher than I'll ever be," I muttered, wrapping his leg in gauze. He blinked, once like he'd heard me. For a second, I caught my reflection in his eyes. Not a rescuer, not a man who'd lost a son, just another soul crawling out of the dark. Outside, the black bear hadn't moved. He stood like a statue at the edge of the trees, head lowered. Every few seconds, he'd lift his nose, sniff the air, then settle again. It wasn't threat. It was watchfulness. That kind of silent animal compassion you can't explain to people who've never seen it. Keen, I didn't know that would be his name yet, tried to stand. His paw slipped, but he didn't quit. That brave pup staggered twice, tail twitching, then leaned against my boot and refused to fall. "Okay," I whispered. "Little soldier, you win." I carried him inside the cabin, laid him near the heater. And felt something I hadn't felt in years. The sound of breathing that wasn't my own. Outside, I heard the bear shuffle once and let out a low, almost human grunt. Then silence. I turned back to the puppy, and he was staring at the door, not afraid, but waiting for him, for the one who'd kept him alive until I arrived. And in that look, I understood something. Bone deep. This wasn't the end of a rescue. It was the beginning of a bond that didn't belong to me alone. He wouldn't eat. Not at first. The bowl sat untouched while the little German shepherd puppy just watched the door, ears twitching toward the soundless forest. His ribs rose and fell like he was listening for footsteps I couldn't hear. I'd seen animals starve out of fear before, but this wasn't that. This was loyalty, waiting for the black bear that had once stood between him and death. I tried every trick I knew from years of wildlife rescue. Warm broth, soft words, patience. He kept his eyes on the door, muscles tight, jaw locked. It broke me more than I'll ever admit, watching that small rescued puppy refuse comfort because his heart hadn't caught up to safety. Finally, I sat on the floor beside him, bowl in my lap. "All right, soldier," I said quietly. "You win again." I dipped my fingers into the broth and held it out. He sniffed, then turned his head away. But when I didn't move, he inched forward, slow, deliberate, and licked once, eyes never leaving mine. That single gesture, it wasn't about hunger. It was about trust being born out of the ashes. When he finished half, I felt his body ease, the tremor in his shoulders fading. He crawled closer, put his head on my knee, and sighed that same fragile sound I'd heard in the snow. And I swear it echoed the soft rhythm of a brave pup learning what peace feels like for the first time. I reached down and whispered, "You're safe. Here, Keen." The name slipped out before I could think. It fit, sharp, quiet, alive. He blinked once, almost like approval, and closed his eyes. Outside, something shifted in the darkness. Not danger, but presence. A low grunt far off, deep as thunder under the earth. Keen lifted his head, ears high, tail still. He didn't bark, he just listened. And that's when I realized the wilderness hadn't let him go yet. The bond between that puppy and the bear wasn't broken. It was waiting. The next morning, the snow outside the cabin was clean except for two things: fresh bear prints leading right to my porch, and the faint paw marks of a German shepherd puppy pressed beside them. Keen stood by the door before I even opened it. Tail stiff, body still. He didn't growl, didn't bark. He just stared at those tracks like he recognized the handwriting of a ghost. I stepped out, slowly, my breath a fog between us and the wild. The prints circled the cabin. Once. No claw marks on the wood, no sign of a threat, just presence. It felt like the black bear had come to check on him, like a father who can't quite walk away from his child. Keen followed me, outside, limping but determined. That brave pup dragging his bad leg through the snow to place his paw right inside the bear's print. Perfect fit. My throat tightened before I even knew why. This was no accident. The wilderness was stitching something together, one animal at a time. I knelt beside him, hand on his back, feeling that slow, nervous breath. "You remember him, don't you?" I whispered. He turned his head toward me, then back to the trees. It was all the answer I needed. Animal instinct runs deeper than memory. Its connection, carved into bone. Inside, I built the fire higher, but he kept glancing at the door. Part of him was still out there, running with the bear through the drifts. And maybe part of me was too. I caught myself checking the window, scanning the ridge for a shadow I wasn't sure I feared anymore. By evening, the tracks were gone, covered in fresh snow. But Keen hadn't moved from that spot by the door. He was waiting. Not for food. Not for me, for something only he could feel. I wanted to tell him it was over. That he was safe, that bears don't come back once they've walked away. But just as I reached for the latch, the wind carried a deep, distant sound, a single, low rumble that rolled through the valley. Keen's ears lifted and his tail gave one small wag. I froze because it wasn't thunder. It was a call, and Keen had just answered it with his heart. The storm came 3 nights later. No warning, no mercy, just the kind that makes the trees groan like old bones. I'd sealed the windows, stacked firewood, done everything I knew. But when the power snapped off, the silence that followed was louder than the wind. Keen pressed against my leg, that little German shepherd puppy, trembling, but not from fear. More like instinct telling him something was near. I opened the door a crack. Snow swept in sideways, thick enough to erase everything past the porch. And there, just beyond the blur, 2 shapes in the storm. One small, one enormous. The small one barked once, the large one didn't move. I blinked hard, but they were gone, swallowed by white. It wasn't possible. And yet deep inside I knew exactly what I'd seen. I pulled Keen close, his fur damp against my hand. He looked up at me like he wanted to follow that shadow back into the wilderness, like he missed the heartbeat that once matched his. I whispered, "Not tonight, soldier. We fight the cold together." He pressed his nose to my chin and sighed. The sound of a brave pup trying to believe in warmth again. Hours passed. The fire dimmed. I cut the last of the bread in half, gave him the bigger piece. He chewed slow, eyes on the door, while I pretended not to notice mine were doing the same. Out there, the wind carried a rhythm, long, low, and steady. It felt less like weather and more like breathing, bear breathing. I swear it. When the storm eased, I stepped outside, with Keen in my arms. The world was buried under white silence, and thereby the edge of the clearing stood a mound of snow shaped too perfectly to be accident. I brushed the surface and found it. Another paw print, massive, deep, still warm under the crust. The black bear had been there through the storm, close enough to guard us without being seen. Keen sniffed it once and wagged his tail, slow and certain. And for the first time, I realized he hadn't been afraid of the wind at all. He'd been listening to his by morning. The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind felt heavier than the snow on the roof. Keen limped to the door, nose twitching at the frozen air, then looked back at me like he was asking for permission to remember. I opened it for him, just a crack, and that German shepherd puppy stood there, thin, bruised, proud, staring out at a world he somehow still believed in. I'd seen soldiers do that after wildfires, stand at the edge of ruin and wait for what's left to come back. That's what he was doing, waiting for a sound, a scent, a promise. I wrapped him in my old parka and started the truck. We needed supplies, food, medicine, bandages, and there was a rescue outpost a few miles down the mountain. He sat on the seat beside me, watching the road, his reflection in the glass lined up perfectly with mine. 2 survivors pretending not to look broken. When I carried him into the outpost, the volunteer young kid, probably half my age, let out a whistle. "Sir, that's a wild one. German shepherd puppy, right? He's lucky to be alive out here." I nodded, because lucky is what people say when they can't explain something. I didn't tell him about the bear. Didn't mention the paw prints or the way that wilderness rescue had felt like witnessing something sacred. They checked Keen's wounds, gave me antibiotics and a pat on the shoulder. And in the kind they give men who look like they haven't slept since something broke inside them. Keen didn't flinch. When they touched him, He just kept his eyes on me the whole time, like I was the only steady thing left in a world that kept shifting under his paws. On the drive back, he rested his head against my arm. Every bump in the road made him sigh, soft and trusting, the kind of sound that fills a man's chest and empties his lungs at the same time. When we reached the cabin, he lifted his head, ears perked. Something had changed. In the air, the snow outside was smooth, except for one new line cutting through the drifts. Broad, deep, unmistakable. A single trail of bare footprints, leading straight toward the ridge. Keen stood up on the seat, tail stiff, eyes locked on that path, as if he already knew what it meant. The wild wasn't finished with us yet. That night, Keen couldn't rest. He paced by the window, ears flicking at every sound the mountain made. The fire burned low, but his eyes, those deep, searching eyes, never left the glass. Every time the wind shifted, he'd tilt his head, listening for something I couldn't hear. It wasn't fear, it was recognition. I watched that German Shepherd puppy pause by the door, nose pressed against the cold wood. Then he did something that broke me wide open. He lifted his paw, slow, deliberate, and pressed it against the frost-covered window. The print stayed there, small and fragile, melting against the glass. And outside, faint but visible, was another mark, bigger, deeper, pressed into the snow. Beyond the porch, a bear's paw. The sight hit like a punch to the chest. Two shapes, two lives divided by one thin wall. That puppy and bear had survived, together in the wild, sharing food, warmth, breath. And now here they were, still finding each other through distance and glass. Call it instinct, call it loyalty. Whatever it was something I didn't have words for. I stepped closer, hand hovering near Keen's back, but not touching. He didn't blink, didn't move. He just stared at that print like it was a heartbeat. And, for a moment, I saw the reflection of both paws, his on one side, the bear's on the other, lined up perfectly. That image burned itself into me. It wasn't about survival anymore. It was about connection, animal trust that didn't need explanation or ownership. The kind of trust I'd lost a long time ago. Keen finally turned to me, eyes soft, breathing slow. He curled up near the door, right beneath the spot where the paw prints met, and exhaled one long sigh that sounded almost human. Outside, snow began to fall again, quiet and endless, covering every print except those two. I sat beside him until morning, both of us staring at that frozen mirror. And when the wind shifted, at dawn, carrying the faint scent of the wild, Keen's tail thumped once. He knew, before I did, the mountain was calling. Again. By the third morning, Keen stopped eating. He just sat by the door, staring at the trees, ears low but eyes sharp. You could feel it. The pull, the invisible thread between that German shepherd puppy and the wild that raised him. He wasn't restless. He was remembering. I tried everything. His blanket, the jerky he loved, even my old flannel he used to sleep on. Nothing worked. Every sound from the woods made him lift his head. Every gust of wind carried a name he hadn't forgotten. I told myself it was just instinct, that animals move on faster than people. But I knew better. He wasn't moving on. He was waiting for permission. I followed his gaze out to the ridge. The bear's tracks were there again. Faint now, but real. The same American black bear that had stood guard through the storm. Solace, the one I hadn't dared to name until that moment. The wilderness had written its message in snow and silence, and the puppy was the only one fluent enough to read it. That night, Keen pressed against the door, harder than before. When I opened it, the cold hit me like a slap, but he didn't flinch. He stepped forward, one paw into the snow, then looked back at me, not afraid, just asking, like a brave pup asking his rescuer if it was okay to go home. My throat closed up. Everything in me screamed to hold him back, to keep him safe, to not lose another soul to those mountains. But I remembered what Solace had done. Guarded, not taken. Protected, not possessed. And I realized love isn't about keeping something close. It's about letting it find where it belongs. So I knelt in the snow and whispered, "Go on, soldier. He's waiting." Keen hesitated, then pressed his forehead to my hand. Once gentle, final. He turned toward the ridge and trotted off, tail straight, steps light. Halfway there, he stopped and looked back one last time. Behind him, a massive shadow emerged. From the trees, slow, calm, sure, the black bear. Two shapes side by side, disappearing into white. And I stood there, frozen with my hands still warm. From where he'd said goodbye. For 3 days I didn't see them. No tracks, no sound, not even a broken branch to say they'd passed through. The ridge went silent, the kind of silence that makes you realize how loud hope can be when it's dying. Every night I'd catch myself opening the door just to listen. Nothing, not even wind. I told myself they were fine. That wilderness rescue wasn't about saving. It was about trusting nature to finish what it started. But that lie wore thin fast. I'd been through loss before. I knew the feel of something that wasn't coming back. Then on the 4th morning I heard it. A single sharp bark carried through the pines. Not panic, not pain. It was a call. I ran outside barefoot, snow burning my feet. And there they were on the ridge, Keen standing tall, beside the massive shape of the black bear. 2 survivors side by side, framed by sunlight breaking through the clouds, like it had been waiting for them. That German shepherd puppy looked different. Stronger, heavier, alive in a way only the wild can teach. He turned his head toward me, tail flicking once, not wagging, acknowledging like a brave pup, saying, I made it. You can stop worrying now. Solace stood behind him, that scarred face calm, almost knowing. He didn't move, didn't threaten, just watched me, with the patience of something older than pain, the kind of patience grief never learns. It was then I realized that bear hadn't taken Keen away. He'd brought him home. Keen stepped forward, pressed his paw into the snow, and the bear mirrored it beside him. 2 prints, small and large, touching at the edges. Then, without sound or warning, they turned and walked toward the tree. The pup didn't look back again. He didn't have to. The woods swallowed them whole, and I stood there alone on the ridge watching their prints fade into light. It should have felt like goodbye, but it didn't. It felt like something else, like the mountain had finally exhaled, like both of them were where they were meant to be. Still, when the wind picked up and carried a low growl, followed by one soft bark, I swear I heard my name inside it, and I whispered back just to make sure they knew I was listening. Weeks passed. Snow melted into the soil and the mountain breathed again. I told myself they were gone for good. That's what the wilderness does. It takes and it keeps. But every time I walked past the ridge, I'd find something waiting. A single paw print beside a bigger one. Fresh, precise, always together. The locals started asking if I'd seen the ghost bear again. Said people were spotting a German shepherd puppy trotting beside a black bear in the distance near the river trail. Most didn't believe it. They laughed. I didn't, because I'd seen that bond up close. What survival can make of love when words aren't part of the language. One afternoon, while checking traps left behind by campers, I found a feather not from any bird I'd seen in these woods. Gray, long, strewn with mud and fur, and beside it a scrap of fabric. My old flannel, the one Keen used to sleep on. Torn, carried, dragged through rain and brush. I don't know how it got there, but I knew why. It wasn't a message. It was a return, a proof of life. The wilderness has its own ways of saying we're still here. That day I sat down in the dirt and laughed until I cried, because grief had just lost again. That night, I left the cabin door cracked open. No reason, no plan, just instinct. And sometime before dawn, I heard it. Not a bark, not a growl. Something in between. Low, steady, close. I didn't move, didn't even breathe. Outside, a shadow brushed against the porch light. Then 2 shapes, one tall, one small, paused at the edge of the clearing. The bear turned its head, and the puppy, my brave little pup, lifted his face toward the cabin just for a moment. The moon hit his fur, that black and tan, shine-eyed. Never forgotten. Then they vanished back into the trees. No sound, no trace, just the faint print of a paw beside a larger One pressed into wet earth like a promise that the wild had never taken them. It had taught them how to live. And standing there barefoot on the porch, I whispered to the night, "Good boy, Keen. Stay close to him. People always ask me if I ever saw them again. Truth is, I don't need to. Some things stay with you even when they're gone. There's not a day I don't think about that German Shepherd puppy, about Keen, and the way he looked at that bear like he already knew what home meant. I used to believe rescue was about pulling animals out of danger. Turns out, sometimes it's about setting them free into the life they were meant for. That bond between the puppy and the bear, it wasn't something nature made by accident. It was survival choosing companionship over fear. Two souls that should have never met. And yet somehow, they saved each other. You can't fake that. You can't teach it either. I still volunteer at the shelter. Sometimes I sit with the new rescues, those trembling pups who flinch at every sound. I tell them about Keen, about how a little shepherd found family in the unlikeliest place. How trust can grow, even in the coldest corners of the world. This little guy's journey from abandonment to rehabilitation shows how important nonprofit rescue groups really are. Because every animal deserves a chance not just to survive, but to belong. Caring for a rescued puppy is more than love. It's responsibility. It's pet care. It's learning that compassion doesn't end where comfort begins. And when I close the shelter, each night, I still glance toward the